Previously on Popping Collars.
Well, and in some cases, in a lot of cases, I think it's literally a voice, like a sound that you make. And I noticed this with young clergy a lot, is that stained glass voice that is totally an affect. I have no idea where it comes from.
Can you give me yours right now, Liz?
I totally have one, and it's like the slam poetry voice. I absolutely have one, and that's because my undergraduate degree was in creative writing, so I was doing poetry readings every weekend. It's been hard to unlearn. I totally have that, so I'm not exempt from.
Where can we watch your most recently streamed sermon, Liz, so that our audience might witness?
We don't have
slam poetry
in my
Welcome to Popping Collars, the podcast that lives at the intersection of religion and pop culture. My name is Greg Knight. I am the Director of Children and Youth Ministries at the Church of Bethesda by the Sea in Palm Beach, Florida. With me are no co-hosts. They are scattered to the winds this week. So that's a perfect opportunity for me to put together an all-star panel of guests. First, he loves it when we call him the godfather of Popping Collars. It's Richard Lindsay, everyone.
I am back in the Bay Area in California, in Vallejo in the North Bay, because I can't afford to live in the East Bay anymore. And so I'm very glad to be here. Yeah.
And what are you up to these days?
These days, I am teaching public speaking and communication at University of San Francisco, and I am also continuing to teach classes at Graduate Theological Union in popular culture and religion. My class this past spring was in science fiction, fantasy, and comic books and religion. It just continues to be a blessing to be able to teach these kinds of courses.
Sweet. And as if Richard wasn't enough, we have not just one, but both hosts of the excellent Killer Serials podcast, which you're going to want to go back and listen to their past episodes.
Because we don't have any new ones.
That podcast.
Hard to listen to the current episode.
I feel like you just have us on here because you're trying to kickstart us into getting into a new show.
No, you know what?
For.
I want to have you guys on because now I can call this our Popping Serials episode, or even better, our Killer Collars.
I like it. That's really good.
Which is such a great name. Hard to say, but really good name for a podcast, Killer Collars.
Those are good crossovers, yeah.
Parker and Tony Jones. Gentlemen, where are you guys, and what do you do when you're not doing this?
Hey, I'm Tony Jones. I'm in Minneapolis. I'm in a suburb of Minneapolis called Edina. And I'm a writer, editor, and, occasional seminary professor. So my day job is working at Fortress Press, but I've got some side hustles going, including one with Ryan that holds a lot of promise.
What about you, Ryan?
I'm based in Los Angeles, where I hustle with Tony Jones on a irregular basis. Marketing and public relations for film pays the bills. And we're also moving into developing content. So we have an option out on a book to try to sell a script about that, based on that book. So
I feel lazy compared to you guys. I do nothing except watch TV.
Except the Lord's work.
This is episode 87 of Popping Collars, and our topic today is the hit documentary "Won't You Be My Neighbor," a film that explores the life and work of the beloved children's television personality Fred Rogers and his PBS series Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So I think all of us sitting around our virtual roundtable are of an age where we grew up with Mr. Rogers as a staple of public television. So I'll throw this out to the panel, and anybody can jump on it. Was there something in this documentary that stood out to you as information that you didn't previously know about either Mr. Rogers, the show, or the man?
I can't say that I ever really reflected on Fred Rogers. I mean, I knew he was an ordained Presbyterian minister. I did not know that he was ordained to television evangelism by the Presbyterian Church. I thought that was interesting. I had never really reflected on it, but I guess watching the documentary, it's no surprise that the guy was extraordinarily disciplined.
Yeah.
Like in everything he did. He exercised. He obviously he was not a glutton. He did, it's just like everything about him was done with great rigor and discipline.
I didn't know that, or if I did, I'd forgotten that he was ordained minister. It made me think about, especially Tony bringing this up, it made me think about how that reveals like how much faith at one point in history the church or certain denominations had in the power of film and TV. That they would have said, these are our new missionaries, right? And so it just kind of confirms that. I think the most surprising thing for me, though, was how progressive his show was and the material that they addressed, like the war and divorce and all these things, so early on in the show. I mean, I think just as a kid, what sticks to me are the puppets and the song and the day trips he would take. But I don't recall any of the heavier stuff that they really do feature in the show or in the film, in the doc.
I was what was interesting, it elicited gasps from the audience because I saw it in Berkeley, was that he was a lifelong registered Republican.
Yep.
And that one was like, I think people forget that there was a time you could be a moderate conservative because that used to exist. But, those kind of Jerry Ford Republicans, I understand that. Those are my people. So, but that was interesting. And at the same time, though, he was somebody who didn't seem to take a lot of political stances on things, at least publicly. He seemed to kind of keep that to himself.
So one of the conceits of the documentary was the use of the puppets, like what Ryan was saying about the puppets. This idea that they represent different parts of his personality. And that's interesting that you make that political point. That's sort of like staying out of the fray. It makes me wonder, like, was there a way for him to voice some of that stuff, but not him giving voice to it? Some of the stuff with Fred Rogers and the puppets, like talking to kids, felt a little odd. Like, is it him or is it a character? Sometimes I wonder, like, if it's something, if you're taking a subject like Fred Rogers that already has a lot of goodwill that people feel towards it, do you feel sometimes compelled, like as an audience member, to kind of gloss over some of the things that makes him maybe a more complex person?
They seem to say that his Achilles heel was that he didn't believe in himself enough. So they brought up that letter that said, where he was saying, I after all this, can I really still write a script? And they talked about Daniel Striped Tiger as being like his sort of childhood view of himself, and that he was very vulnerable.
Like that's the puppet that's ministering to him.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't see and then they occasionally came up with, they also kind of compared him a little bit to the King Friday character, and that he was could be a little bit imperious, or that he had a very specific way of doing things. And possibly, I think some of the later footage was supposed to show that he felt angry or disappointed with the way that mass media had gone. There was a little bit of that, but I think you have to approach that really carefully, because I think one of his sons called him the second Jesus. Yeah. And so you have to be really careful about, it's like sort of like Lincoln, or some of these other characters. You have to be really careful about what you say about them, because they're holy figures in a way.
I think I want to jump on something that Richard just said there, because I thought that the stuff about like him transitioning to becoming more like King Friday the 13th as the show went on, and it was like they kind of brushed that aside, but it's almost like, well, if we're going to do this documentary on this guy, we have to it can't be 100% cotton candy, we have to. But I looked at those his two sons, and I'm like, damn it, that's what I want to know about.
I was thinking the same thing.
Very freaking different. And I want to know, what kind of a dad was this guy? And that was never mentioned. What kind of a dad was this guy?
Do you think are you guys suggesting that these are a detriment to the film?
I think that the film is trying to do something, it has a clear vision for what it wants to be, which is, I think that the film is about, and maybe we can talk about this. I think the film is about how you don't always choose your vocation in life. Sometimes your vocation kind of chooses you. So this idea that Fred Rogers, probably just wanted to be a nice Presbyterian minister, but he had this gift for talking and relating to children. And that's what he needed to do in life. And so the documentary was very much sort of geared towards that story. But it felt like, you would see these sort of angelic images of him walking down the beach, and you're thinking, well, I mean, that's nice, but I know people, and people are more complex than here's this great guy walking on the beach with his family.
I think you guys are hitting at undertones of his character because it seemed like to me as the film went on, like you're talking about this kind of maniacal thing that like all he cared about was the success of the show. Yeah. Even though he didn't want to do that early in life. I mean, I think there was some complexity there with that. It's like that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, the opening scene is really lovely when he's trying to describe teaching using music and movements on the piano. And it shows like there is a complexity there. Teaching is complex because it's about relationship.
I have kind of a theory, and like some of this fits into different parts of like what we discussed so far. So like there's the question of the sons. How well did they get along with their dad? There's the question of the people who got along with him or whatever. And like what everybody kept saying the same over and over again was this is not a persona he puts on television. That this is the way he is in everyday life. And you would see him doing interviews with adults, and he would talk to them like children.
Yeah.
He would talk to them with this extreme earnestness, kind of humorlessness. And they made you go uncomfortable, really. Like you would thought he would have like just been able to sit back and just kind of laugh at himself. But he didn't seem to be capable of doing that. And one of the words that one of the people in the film used was eccentricity. And I wonder if he had a kind of a weird disorder, but that disorder was towards a kind of preternatural kindness towards children.
Oh.
Because like if you can have narcissistic personality disorder like our president, is it possible that you could have kind of a weird personality quirk that actually makes you extremely empathetic, and somebody who sees the kind of broken child in everybody and reaches out to that, well, may or may not be able to relate on other levels. We think of sort of within these boundaries of normal behavior, and we worry more about abnormal behavior that's going to hurt people. But what if you have abnormal behavior that helps people? We don't hear that much about that because, it could be this is just the way this guy was.
Are we so accustomed to seeing a particular version of masculinity on television that when we see somebody like Fred Rogers or Rick Steves or these are all like public television figures that I think about, or like Ken Burns or whatever. We're like, well, he's not very masculine. I mean,
Ira Glass. I was so shocked to find out Ira Glass was straight. I was like, are you kidding?
Yes, exactly.
No, I think that's right. I think you nailed it, Tony, because it's like what Richard was saying about the things that made Fred Rogers bristle in popular television, right, were sort of the G.I. Joe images, the Thundercats images, like all of these sort of, heightened masculinity, rippling muscles, sort of all of that stuff. It's the same thing that, it's the same idea that you get from Westerns where the weakest person in the town is the town like parson, who's at the church and doesn't have the guts that it takes to like, run the bandits out of town. Like he has to hide in his church the whole time. It's that kind of feel to it.
Or anybody who's educated, anybody who's like been to, has a university education or has read Shakespeare or whatever. Yeah. They're always the weakling.
Right. And especially with men working with children, as a man who works with children, I can tell you I'm in the minority in the church world. And I think it's because of perceptions of the roles that men serve when it comes to children. Youth ministry, sure. children's ministry, well, wait a second. Like, what are you doing? You know,
let's keep an eye on that one.
Yeah.
So I think the major message of the film was civility and incivility. That was the sense that I got watching it, was that I felt that the film was indicting our current culture for being uncivil.
Yeah.
And then some of the reviews I've read, and also just I think in the reaction of the people who were watching the film, because like, I don't know about where you guys saw it, but where I saw it, everybody was like in tears. They were like, there's just, I've never heard so much sniffling. And I mean, except at like in a romantic film or something. And my sense was I felt there was a certain indictment of the culture that, what have we become? And we have not lived up to Mr. Rogers' vision of neighborliness and the idea that we should get along with each other.
I think you're right. I think we have a Pollyanna view of what it was like. I mean, I think when they show clips of other shows that were running it, everything on his show was so slow. And they even showed like there was a clip from either Sesame Street or the Electric Company of like a guy with cakes falling downstairs.
Which was my absolute favorite. I loved that.
But they used that as an example of how bad TV was for kids, because it was fast and chaotic and klutzy and like Keystone Cop slapstick humor. So did he think he was alone? Like he was unique in the television landscape for having this slow civil discourse? And is that really preparing kids for the real world? Yeah, I'm with you, Richard. I think that's an indictment that is historically naive.
I don't think you have to go all the way to one side, though, with the indictment or the criticism. I mean, I still think there's a part of that holds water. We're certainly not any better. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know that we're vastly better. It's not like we've evolved to to communicate or to be more civil. And I think at least that was his goal, was to try to instill a sense of self-worth in young viewers and for them to see the value of the other. And I don't know that we've delivered on that vision any better than, and I don't think we have to say that we have to think that the past was somehow better to make sense of where we are. I still think you can look at this film as a call to be better. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that the filmmaker would disagree with that.
Here's one thing that I don't think would happen today is I do not think that a member of Congress at the end of the testimony of a public television figure would say, you know what? You're right. I think you just got $20 million. As we walked out of the theater, that was the character that my wife mentioned. It was like, that congressman, he had some real damage.
Yeah. That was like a real Mr. Smith Goes to Washington moment, though. Like the thing that I always love about pop culture and politics is that you're one like stirring speech away from like changing policy in the country, and it never that's not how it works, right?
That's the Aaron Sorkin fallacy.
Yeah, it's the American president, right? Like all of a sudden I'm going to convince everyone of my rightness.
It worked in Independence Day.
Well, now that was a compelling speech.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, Mr. Rogers, sure, but come on, Bill Pullman?
Well, so that was the thing I miss more than the civility, or if I had a sense of what this was an indictment of in terms of our current society, was that I feel like I grew up, having been a little kid in the mid to late 1970s, in kind of a sweet spot for public investment in things like mass media, public television, public education through television, and things like that. Yeah. The fact that I sat there every day and watched Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers, and the Electric Company, which I think had a great effect on me as a person, and the fact that that's no longer available. You have to have HBO to watch Sesame Street now.
Yeah.
And so the fact that there was a time when people felt like that the public media and that the airwaves were actual actually owned by the people, and that they should be a resource that should be shared within the society in order to lift the whole society up. That is gone. It is absolutely gone. So, I mean, we talk about, this is the golden age of television, but it's really not. It's the golden age of streaming service. You have to be able to pay for it in order to watch the good stuff. And when you talk about these days, like, the kind of hoarding of educational resources that's going on, where, upper middle class families are making sure their kids get to watch Sesame Street. They get to go to a great preschool. They get to go to a private school. They get to go to Yale and Harvard. There's a whole back catalog of educational experiences that those kids get, that if you don't have those opportunities, you might be super smart and you might be able to get into a good college, but you're not going to get all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And it just tends to perpetuate this generation to generation passing on of privilege. And I feel like that, to me, that was the most obvious thing that was missing.
I mean, if you think about the space where these things live, right? So like Reading Rainbow was about literacy and Sesame Street was about sort of numbers and letters and stuff. And Mr. Rogers, the space where it lived, the niche that it lived in public education and public television was morality and decency. It was the manners show, how to have good manners, how to be a good neighbor.
And emotional intelligence.
Yeah. Empathy. How to have empathy.
Yeah.
And as these things start to get more and more privatized, you start to wonder, like, what's the vacuum that gets created? Like, is decency a public good that needs to be encouraged in some art form that's available to everyone?
I would say so. And I would say, I think even for Mr. Rogers, I mean, I don't know if he went far enough or if they needed to find some other people that had talents like his, because you generally stop watching that show about the time, at least for me, I stopped watching that show about the time I went to school. And that's when you need it the most. Like
when you went to grade school or grade school? Which
grade
one?
School. Grade school kids need this the most. I mean, it's like they're the least empathetic human beings. So, I mean, it's like they need like constant training in terms of that. And I think there was kind of, it's sort of like you could use that all throughout your life, basically at different stages of your life.
And it makes me wonder, like, the way that documentaries are going, is this the new kind of hagiography that we use to talk about the way that people affect culture?
I did walk away from it thinking he was an extraordinary human being. Yeah. That's what I walked away. And I especially thought that, honestly, because he went and he failed at the show for adults. And he went back and succeeded again. And he didn't reinvent it, but he went to the theme week model. And I thought, oh my gosh, this guy is truly an exceptional human being to be able to do that. And he be able to fail and come back and still have the, this impact, no egg on his face. And it was like then he started becoming this commencement speaker guy, who would dole out wisdom to college kids. I kind of think he deserves the hagiography, quite honestly.
While I am trying to reach the sound, it's steaming for profound. I feel alright. Here comes the mad guy who's screaming how that music is too loud. I'm such a bad
A segment that we do on the show called Staff Picks. So if you think about the old Blockbusters, which I just found out the last Blockbuster in America is closing this week.
No, it's still open.
It's still open?
It's in Oregon.
Oh, I thought they were closing. I thought that was the story.
The last two in Alaska closed, and that makes this one still open.
Bend, Oregon. And you can actually follow the last Blockbuster on Twitter, and it's this freaking hilarious Twitter account.
What I wonder is, do people go to the Blockbuster in Bend, Oregon, and just spend 2 hours staring at the wall trying to figure out what it is that they're going to take home? That's what I remember about Blockbuster.
That's what I did.
So anyway, our staff pick segment is similar to the Blockbuster. If you want to go to Bend, Oregon, and see what it's like, Joe who works at Blockbuster will pick his favorite movies and put them on a shelf, and so that's what we do here at Popping Collars. We make staff picks, and since I'm the only staff here, you guys have to listen to me talk about a movie that I saw last night that I'm still processing. It's called Sorry to Bother You.
I've seen that one. I saw it at South by. I'm keen to talk about it.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So just really quickly, this movie, Sorry to Bother You, stars Lakeith Stanfield from Atlanta, Tessa Thompson, who's really getting into that phase of her career where if she's in something, it's automatically better just because she's in it.
She's incredible.
So Sorry to Bother You is it's a satire by a filmmaker called Boots Riley. It's his first film, and he is it's set in kind of an alternate universe, Oakland, California, and it involves a character named Cassius Green who takes a job at a call center making sales calls, and he realizes that he can actually sell if he uses a white voice. Then chaos just ensues from there, and it's a satire. It's funny, it's mean, it's angry, it's surreal. It's a bit of a fever dream at points. It's this movie that goes in so many different places. It's about 1,500 movies in one movie, but it's definitely worth seeing. So Sorry to Bother You is my staff pick. What did you think about it, Ryan?
I think it was making points that it just. Well, you could make a comment about beating dead horse, but I thought for the first 45 minutes or so, it's incredible. I mean, it's so good that I think even if you don't go where it goes, it doesn't just ruin the experience for you. So yeah, I mean, because you haven't really seen anything like it for that first kind of 2/3 of the film. Really, it's that final act that I'm like, oh man. But I get it. I mean, I get it, and people loved it. The screening I was at was electric. I mean, people were all in.
You can find Popping Collars on the web at poppingcollarspodcast.com. You can find us on all the social media platforms. Just type in Popping Collars in the search bar. And, of course, you can get our podcast in all of the usual podcasting apps. Just don't forget, if you'd like to support the show financially, get some sweet, sweet merchandise at the same time, you can buy one of our t-shirts. Just go to poppingcollarspodcast.com/t-shirts, and you will be the envy of your neighborhood when you show up with your Popping Collars t-shirt. And finally, you can find our show and lots of wonderful Episcopal podcasts on episcopalcafe.com. We love episcopalcafe.com. We know you as well. Check them out for all your Episcopal news needs and beyond. That has been Popping Collars for this time. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Tony, for coming on the show. We will see you next time.
Great to be here.
Keep those collars popped, guys. Thank you.